Hello and welcome to the AdTech Heroes podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, and I'm delighted to be joined by Azad and Sumeet. Azad has over 10 years' experience in the UK programmatic industry, where he has worked at Dentsu, the Exchange Lab, and Publicis. His current role is the Head of Performance Insight at Spark Foundry. Sumeet has over 12 years' experience working at multinational companies and consultancies, focusing on innovation and transformation. He now works as the Global Head of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at one of the largest media and technology companies in the Nordics, Schibsted. Hi Azad, hi Sumeet, great to have you here today.
Hey.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thank you. Just to kind of kickstart really, it'd be great to understand both of your careers and what's got you here today. So let's start with you, Sumeet.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to talk about this team with you guys. I have a finance background basically. And I started in finance in a telecom company in Norway, where I spent a few years leading up to working on the group level on transformations. So in the Telenor context, it was around industrialization, going from 13 kind of companies to one, and creating those synergies, looking at how we could be a global one company. After that, I spent a few years in a consultancy company called the Ramble Group. I worked in the group level there with digital and innovation, also a transformation journey. But on the side of that, I've been kind of active in the society, working on something called the Norwegian Turban Day, and I sit in several councils and boards with touches upon the kind of diversity element in the society. So I would say that kind of in business, I work with business transformation, whilst outside business, I work with the transforming kind of the society, and all this leads up to making companies and business and society a better place to be, no matter what kind of background you have. So that's led up to my kind of choosing to work with diversity, inclusion, and belonging here in Schibsted, which is where I think it's a link between kind of working with transformation in business and transforming kind of how we act and how we embrace differences in the business life.
Amazing. And Azad?
Hi, yeah, so I guess like many other people, I kind of fell into the space. I studied more around kind of information systems, so I was always interested in tech, and the role which I started off at Amnet at the time. Actually, it was technically I prospected at the time, and then a couple of months later, Amnet officially formed. So I could technically say I was one of the initial members of Amnet. There was 6 of us at the time, so kind of seeing where it's gone to, it's been amazing to see. So I was there for a good kind of 2.5 years. I then moved on to the Exchange Lab, and it again did that for about 2.5 years, and I've been at Publicis in the former Blue 449 and now Spark Foundry for about 5 years now. So being in the programmatic space all that time, so constantly seeing all the innovations, and I guess it's just a really interesting space to be in, or something to learn, and you kind of keeps you on your toes, I guess, all the time. So yeah, I guess that would be kind of how I've got to here.
Amazing. And thanks for that, both of you. It's always good to get a difference of opinion from different sectors or people located in different places. So to me, obviously, you're located in Norway, and Azad, you're based in London, as am I. But to begin with, I think, obviously we're talking about the topic diversity and inclusion today, and it's such an important topic. It's front of mind for a lot of businesses, a lot of people, and it should be. But in terms of diversity and the meaning of it, what does that mean to both of you? So Azad, I'd like to start with you. What does diversity mean to you?
Thanks. So I guess diversity to me kind of means bringing different views and different lived experiences to the table. the ability to bring alternative ideas that can encompass like a wider range of individuals into the discourse, and it will therefore then bring representation in interview as well. So, having said all of that, diversity, for it to be meaningful, kind of needs to go hand in hand with inclusion. And I guess diversity sometimes can look like almost just hitting, a quota, and individuals really need to feel their authentic self in order to be able to grow the environment around them, as opposed to just having to adapt to it. So yeah, I think that's kind of what diversity can mean, but like I said, in order to make it authentic, it needs to be hand in hand with kind of inclusion as well.
Yeah, I would also support that. I think, yeah, it's about kind of the different perspectives, and also, like you mentioned, Azad, I think you can't kind of separate diversity with inclusion or belonging. It's kind of very interlinked. So it's more powerful, and I would say right to discuss these themes all together. But just to start with the diversity, for me, it means, like Azad said, different perspectives. I also think that we have tend to focus a lot on diversity in starting with gender. So it's been a lot of focus on gender. Then you have a lot of focus on kind of ethnicity and the diversity aspect we see as such. But diversity is much more than what we see, right? Diversity could be, it can also be where you grew up, what school you went to, what have you experienced at your home, right? So there's a lot more in the diversity dimension than what I think we tend to focus on, or what we tend to kind of link diversity with. But it's all together these perspectives, which means that it's just making the range much more wider than just having one perspective or one kind of people involved. You have a set of people, a set of perspectives include, and much more beyond what we see necessarily.
Yeah, Sumeet, I think that's a really good point. I think we're fixated on the way people look and kind of like the outward facing, like you just said, but never really delve deep into what the person is, their upbringing, their background, not only just educational, but their social upbringing and background and their situation, right? And I think that needs to be a key focus for sure. Sumeet, would you say then, in the last kind of few years, it's been front of mind? Your role itself is focusing on diversity and inclusion, and these types of roles probably didn't exist 5 years ago. I can't remember ever seeing that. But I've seen definitely in the last couple of years a lot more roles, whether it's within our industry, within the advertising or the media industry or technology. But I think a lot of different industries now have this kind of head of diversity inclusion. So would you say there's a particular reason for that, why we've seen that change?
Yeah, and I think I totally agree. I think the amount of position as head of diversity, inclusion, belonging in the Nordics or in Norway just have probably doubled the past year or so. I think I read that somewhere. So there's a definite kind of transformation happening out there. But I will also say that there's a lot of differences in the different countries or regions. So in the US, you probably have had these positions for years. I think also, if you compare the Nordics with the UK, UK have also kind of been a much more diverse society for years and are ahead of what we are in the Nordics. But definitely in the Nordics, there is a change happening. And we can't kind of hide that, for instance, the Black Lives Matter made or accelerated this change. The amount of kind of focus this have had, I think, wouldn't be possible without Black Lives Matter. So there has been a change, and there is a transformation happening. And it's because also it's not we have these positions because we see that there are systematic challenges in our industry and in the business world and in the society which we need to work on and to improve. So it's a good reason for having this acceleration of this area, I think. And but just to look on the other side, we see a increase in these positions coming now, but hopefully in maybe 10 years we don't have these positions anymore because it's such a business as usual that it's integrated in every leaders and every employee's business as usual.
Yeah, and Azad, in terms of like working in advertising and working in media, have you seen there been a shift or a change in this from, when you started 10 years ago? Have you seen diversity and inclusion being talked about a lot more?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I guess started to talk from a personal point of view and then kind of moving out. So there was a point in time where I was just happy having a job and just kind of appreciating like being in the world of work, and not seeing too many people around me didn't really bother me too much because I was just trying to get my head down and get on with the job. Whereas over the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, I've become a little bit more aware of just how the lack of diversity within kind of our industry, and there are certain reasons for it. I won't go into all of them, but I do know that you kind of have to be a certain type of person to, or at least it felt like you had to be a certain type of person to kind of progress. And I have tried to make some strides in order to kind of better allow individuals to find it easier to get into this space. And part of that was working with a few colleagues at my current company at Spark Foundry, and we co-developed a kind of grassroots diversity and inclusion initiative. And so that was done in 2019, and it did get a lot of really good response, both internally within the agency as well as the senior leadership team. And we started to make some good strides in terms of having more conversations about topics that we previously haven't discussed. But as Sumeet alluded to, a lot of what happened last year, both in terms of kind of the murder around George Floyd, but also the COVID pandemic as well. I think the two kind of combining just made us really put a magnifying glass on the industry as a whole, and it certainly helped us to realize that the space that we were in just wasn't quite good enough. And so there's definitely been an accelerated interest in making sure that we are moving towards a space where we are more inclusive and more diverse and more representative. Because as a media agency, so as a media industry, we need to be more representative and more aware of the general consumer. And if we're not as diverse as the general population, then that's going to come across in the work that we do for our clients. So it's definitely been accelerated over the last kind of 18 months.
Yeah, I just want to touch on something you just talked about there, and I totally agree in the sense that when you're kind of first starting out in the industry, and we started in the industry at a very similar time, you needed to fit a certain persona or a certain face. And it's a shame because you used to look at the people that would advance, or anyway, from again, this is my opinion, not anyone else's opinion. It used to be a case where you would look and the certain types of people would get the role, and I don't know whether they were going out a lot more or they were more matey or friends with the bosses, etc. And that was a kind of profile of person that would get far in the company. I do feel though that I think that slowly that is definitely changing to a certain extent, where And maybe, COVID and lockdown and those types of things have impacted that, because you're not all in the office. You're not all fighting for the attention for your boss or, the type of work that you're doing. So now it's kind of, you're really kind of left to it, and you're trusted. And I know that's completely, we can talk about that for many hours. But yeah, I think, just on your point, really, that you need to fit a certain persona. I have definitely seen that in the industry. Sumeet, have you seen that over in the Nordics? Have you seen kind of when you probably started off that you needed to fit a certain profile? And how did you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that is probably the case wherever you go in the world, right? Because we have some, first of all, you would like to work with or be with or hang out with people that are similar as you, right? So similar people find each other. So I think that's kind of one thing, right? And if you don't have any friends or anyone in your circle with a beard and a turban, you might have some prejudgment regarding that persona or that person without actually, like, you would prejudge based on what you see. And especially if you read a lot of media, newspapers, and you read a lot of negative articles about this kind of look, or how you associate it with negative things. I think that makes it difficult, no matter if you're kind of in Norway or UK or in India. So that's one thing, and then it's also, I think, a matter of using data. I think we can be much better. The more clear we are on kind of what we want to achieve, what kind of actually perspectives we want or competence we want in our team, and we utilize data to actually evaluate that. Also to evaluate how we compensate employees, how we give people leadership positions. If we utilize data, I think we could be much more neutral. So I think that's somewhere we need to kind of improve, also in Norway. But I can't kind of hide that being like different in Norway also means that I've felt sometimes that I need to take more responsibility when I go into a room and I'm the only one with a turban and a beard. I know that either most likely people will be a bit afraid of reaching out to me, and not because they think I'm scary, but they're also afraid of offending me in one way or another. So if I want to make an impact, I feel that the responsibility kind of lies with me. I need to jump in. I need to kind of reach out and take to speak and to make a conversation. Whilst that might not be the case if you're kind of don't look so different like me.
And are you happy with that kind of education? And I've had it many times as well, just having a conversation. I travel around the world and with work, and I'm lucky enough to do that. But, I speak to some people in different countries and they're like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from the UK. No, really, where are you from? And I know what they're getting at, but I still keep it going. So I'm like, yeah, born in the UK, just outside of London, a little place in Hertfordshire. And then they kind of like, yeah, but where are you from? And then I'm like, oh, you mean originally? Oh yeah, my parents were born in Punjab. They came to the UK in the 60s. I was born in the UK. And then it's kind of, a conversation point. And to be completely honest, I don't feel that they're doing it in a way where it's negative or anything like that. It's hopefully just a genuine interest to be, to understand what different cultures and backgrounds and what they're like. But yeah, I think an education element is important, and especially for our industries. So again, I can give an example of myself. I didn't know this whole advertising industry, and definitely not programmatic, or this whole ad tech industry existed before kind of, landing a job about 10, 11 years ago. And why was that? It was because my parents come from a manual labor background, working class background. They didn't have that education. All they knew was, kind of like the manual jobs that you see. So I didn't have anyone to relate to. I didn't have those questions because no one would be kind of putting that in front of me. So it was either you go into finance, you go into legal, and you go into a science. And the funny thing is, I've got two siblings. My sister pursued the legal route in her education. My brother went down the science route at uni, and I did the economics and the financial route. So we fit that stereotype. But the funny thing is now, none of us three actually work in any of those sectors that we were, doing our education in. And that just clearly shows there's an element of, we just didn't know certain industries exist because we didn't have that background. We didn't have the parents there that would obviously, they would support us and in anything we did, but they just didn't know because they were too busy working two jobs in a week to kind of go out and research all the different elements out there.
Yeah, and my parents have asked me several times, like what I do now, what my job is about, and I must say I struggle so much to explain to them what this job is about, right? Because it's totally out of their kind of understandable reach. That this is a job that you get paid for doing, that there's actually a job that takes care of actually improving or accelerating diversity in a company. The biggest challenge has been actually to explain towards them what a head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging do, and why companies actually see value in that.
I think like it's one thing to explain to your parents. I think sometimes even people within the industry, I struggle to explain what my actual job is. So that's absolutely fine with me.
No, that's totally true. Azad, how can companies become more inclusive, do you think? And what have you seen any examples that have worked well?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that companies can do. The first thing that I would say is invest. So whether it be invest in hiring paid specialists in the role, whether it be investing in training, and when I say training as well, I try to avoid talking specifically about diversity and inclusion training and rather talking about learning and development training, because I think it's very important for individuals to think about diversity and inclusion in respect of progressing as an individual and moving forward, as opposed to just knowing what to say and what not to say. So I think that's an important caveat that I think should be made. But also, just in general, like offering alternatives is such a simple thing that companies can do, because I think we sometimes get very caught up in making sure that the majority is okay, and kind of the democratization of individual of companies and individuals, and making sure that we do what's best, or we do what's best for most people. Whereas just very simple things like, for example, one of the events that we try to put on not try to put on one of the events that we did put on as part of the collective is a very straightforward social event, which is a couple of video games, some pizzas, and some soft drinks. Like usually social events all center around like going out to the pub or and I think something as very simple as that as an alternative, not saying that we don't want alcohol anymore in any of our social events, like that's not the point. It's about making sure that there are alternatives for those that don't want to participate in certain things. And during that event, we got individuals literally coming up to me and messaging me later saying, like, thank you very much for putting that on. Like, I hadn't been to any social events in the company before, and this was the first time that I've been to one. So I think very simple things like that in terms of offering alternatives to individuals just to make them feel included, I think really goes a long way. So yeah, those are the few points I think that's worth kind of concentrating on.
And Sumeet, do you think a certain department should be responsible for diversity and inclusion? I know in the past, or the majority, I'm assuming, is within the HR function, the people's function. Is that where you think it should sit, or what's your opinion on that?
So I think it typically sits in the HR department, but I really believe it shouldn't. It should be in the business, because this shouldn't be kind of a task you do just to kind of get the policies there. And of course, that's important, but it should also be linked to how you create value in the business. I would rather say it should sit in the, for instance, innovation department, because that's, if you want to innovate, you need different perspectives. It should be in the product development department, because you don't want to develop products that only fits certain parts of the population. So you need to also kind of incorporate it in the business, and what you aim to do in the future.
Okay, that's interesting. I think, yeah, like you said, said before in the podcast, was you mentioned it eventually will be, you might not need a role, right? You won't need a Sumeet at every company, being the global head of diversity inclusion, and ultimately it will be up to everyone, and everyone will be pushing towards that goal to being more diverse and inclusive. So yeah, hopefully that is the case. But I can imagine, do you think that will happen in the next year, 2 years, or are we far off it for now?
Yeah, and just to reflect on your first statement, because I think ideally, I think that this is a part of leadership. A good leader has also diversity competence. So I think it will be kind of a given kind of requirement from a leader. I think it is today, to be honest, but we're probably lagging in the process. But in order to be a strong, good leader, this should be a natural part of that. And the transformation in the society is happening today. So if you aren't actually a good diversity manager or leader, or a good leader, you will not, like in our business, we really strive to get the best talents, and that's a struggle. So if you're not the best to lead the diverse competence, you will struggle as a company. So I really think that this transformation is happening now, and then I hope, I don't know, it's difficult to set the year, but I hope that in 10 years that it's just a natural part of everyone's business. So then you have all the policies, all as a fundament, of course, how you run different HR processes, but also that all leaders are very mature when it comes to diversity, and that they also can lead diverse teams.
Do you think the leaders will only really think about it if it hits their bottom line or their revenue number, like everything else? It seems like whenever a strategy changes or there needs to be an update, the first question always is, how is it going to impact my revenue? So you think that will also be the case?
Yeah, you mean if this will be a focus when you kind of hit or you have a downfall, or?
Yeah, like will these leaders ultimately are targeted and bonused on revenue, and if they're spending their time trying to hire, having a lot more interviews, trying to hire a lot more diverse candidates, is that changing their focus and moving their focus away of their revenue targets, or can they both work together?
No, yeah, they definitely work together, right? But this is a kind of a long-term bet, right? Like innovation is, if you start investing in innovation today, you might get the results in 5 to 10 years. And the same applies for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. If you invest in this today, you will probably get the results in 5 to 10 years. And that will impact the numbers, right? Definitely. But it's a long-term bet, of course. So on the short term, you need to kind of measure it in a way to see that do we have an inclusive leadership in this company, and then our belief is that on the longer term that will impact the numbers as well.
Definitely. And Azad, what's important why is it important having a diverse workforce? What benefits does it bring?
Yeah, I think so. Kind of touch on that question, but also the question prior to it. So part of the reason why I mentioned having kind of training with kind of learning and development in mind, as opposed to just D&I in isolation. It's really important that managers, whether it be senior leadership, the C-suite, to your kind of day-to-day managers as well, being able to feel comfortable in managing a diverse team is incredibly important for not just making sure that you are able to unleash the potential of each individual within the company, and therefore then kind of take the company forward, really, in order to really just grow the business, bring new ideas to the table, move, create more efficiencies in ways of working, and ultimately financially the business will be better off if all of those kind of pieces come together. So ultimately, if you want to talk just about financials, then having a diverse, inclusive workplace will absolutely get you there. If you just want to talk about having a space and an environment where you can attract the best talent, again, you need to have a space where managers and employees feel comfortable in a space where they can be their authentic self and therefore bring everything that they have to the table. So whichever tack you want to take, it's super important to have a space where you have a diverse kind of workforce that feels included.
Yeah, and I think kind of looking at the bigger picture, really, you've got students or people entering the market now. And I think there are studies to back this. They're looking around, and if they see everyone looks the same, they question it. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, we wouldn't have questioned it. Walking into a room and full of white people, it would have been the norm for all of us, really, 10 to 12 years ago. But now I think those questions are being asked, because you look around, movies, whether it's on TV, whether it's your chat show host, whatever it might be, everyone, again, on the outside looks different, and there is a mix there. So I think that is definitely changing, and we touched on education as well, and that education is happening, and my children will hopefully know a little bit more than I did growing up and studying, and there'll be a lot more opportunities given to them, because everything's more globalized now, from the companies that we all work at. So I think that change is happening, and it's happening in a good way. And you've got different companies or different foundation, like the Brixton Finishing School. I know they're doing an amazing job there in the UK, trying to bring unrepresented kind of like students into the industry, and they're doing a great job there. And I know there's tons of others, the Women in Programmatic, I know they've launched as well, trying to have a voice and have a conversation around programmatic. And, there's going to be a lot more initiatives like this that are working well for our industry. And yeah, so I do think it's going to help all of us massively moving forward. Touching on media, specifically, Azad, have you seen over the years that change as well, in terms of having a lot more diversity and inclusion, whether that's creatives or whether that's targeting of kind of advertising campaigns?
Yeah, again, I think it's definitely something that's been brought to the table a lot more over the last 18 months or so. I think there have been companies that have been looking at it for a slightly longer period. So Channel 4, for example, I know they've been doing kind of an audits almost of kind of advertising and how representative kind of actors within commercials have been, and they've been a little bit more of a that they've had a head start, I guess, on the industry in certain regards. But more and more organizations, whether it be clients themselves, whether it be media agencies, I think there's definitely a lot more awareness around ensuring that we are becoming more diverse in our day jobs. So from a media agency point of view, our first port of call is making sure that we are as diverse and inclusive within our organization. But ultimately, our job is also really has become more important now. Like there used to be a time where our roles didn't really feel, or at least personally, I didn't feel like my job was really important. But increasingly these days, the job that we do is playing, or has the potential to play, a much larger part in society in terms of bringing representation into a wider sphere. So it's definitely something, whether it be a creative point of view, whether it be in terms of how we target media, as you say, and hopefully there'll be something that from a Spark and Publicist point of view that we can kind of bring to the table very shortly in terms of something that I'm working on from a more of a personal project from that point of view. But it's definitely something that's coming more and more into the limelight to make sure that we are practicing what we preach in this space for sure.
And Sumeet, in Norway, are you seeing it being a similar way in terms of media? Is it getting more and more inclusive and diverse?
Yeah, so we definitely see that we have a challenge, right? Because if we want to, it's a democratic challenge. If we have journalists or people sitting in our organization, we will not be that just belong to a certain group of people. We will first of all not have the inside understanding of the society, right? There will be parts where we won't understand or get the right network or the insight, and we will not be able to reach them. So I think it's a democratic problem. If the organizations are not diverse, our products will not be as diverse or and inclusive as we wish to be also. So the change is happening. So what we are kind of trying to do also now is that we see that, like you said yourself, it was a limited kind of areas our parents knew that we should take our education in. So journalism, for instance, wasn't kind of a part of that equation. So we see generally for people with a multicultural background, very few go into the journalist line. So there's the pipeline of multicultural journalists is very small. So then you have to think in other ways. So what we, for instance, have done now, we've kicked off a trainee program where we recruit people with an interesting competence or a competence that we don't have um, from the beginning, or we don't have in our organization, and rather spend time to make them good journalists. So we invest in actually that competence to develop it. So the change is definitely happening, and I think the whole industry is trying to kind of explore how to do this in the right way, so that we can actually also mirror the society we want to have insight in, and the society we want to serve.
Yeah, and I think two kind of words that stuck out there for me was patience. So having patience with, we talked about education, but ensuring everyone, they might have different backgrounds, but it doesn't mean that they can't do that job if they've got the right training, and the companies are patient with them. And I think empathy as well. So, we've talked a lot about like checking in, working with our teams, and just literally just checking in and just, understanding, what makes them tick, what makes them happy, and these types of things. It sounds so obvious and so simple. But we all need to factor in time. We need to block out time in our diaries. Otherwise, you can quite quickly forget about it, right? With your head down, you're doing a day-to-day job. All of a sudden, it's Thursday, it's Friday, the end of the week, and you're like, oh crap, I haven't checked in with my team. So I think, that empathy element is super important as well. I'd one final question for both of you, and this is usually how we finish the podcast episode. And the question is, if you had a superpower in AdTech, what would it be? So I'll start with you, Azad.
It's a tricky one. I'm not sure it quite qualifies as a superpower, but I would say, and I'm not sure if this wording is even right, but the ability to impose ethics on people and organizations. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of access that we have to personal data, to we're in a really exciting space in terms of what we can do with advertising, but with that comes a lot of responsibility as well. And I think over the years, we've, as an industry, certainly certain individuals and certain organizations more than others, but as an industry, we've misused a lot of that data, and that's just had a huge backlash on now what we can do with it, but also the trust within the general consumer. So ultimately, we work in advertising, but we're also consumers ourselves, and there's always an element of, all right, well, how is this going to be used? So I think there's also individuals and organizations that will kind of misuse it to almost like criminal degree as well. So when you think about things like frauds, fraudulent traffic and things like that. So I think just, being able to make sure that we are able to use the infrastructure and the space that we have, but in a way that only is beneficial to us as organizations, but also to the general public and consumers in order to rebuild that trust, I think is is definitely something that I think will be beneficial to us all. So like I said, I'm not sure if that quite qualifies as a superpower, but it feels like that will definitely go some way to rebuilding a huge amount of that trust within our space.
I think they could have like a magical stick, an ethical stick, where you just hit everybody that you meet, and it ensures that they are being very ethical. I think that's a good one. But no, thanks. That's a really interesting one. And Sumeet, how about for you?
Yeah, so I've been spending a lot of time on these questions because I think that this is the kind of the where the magic happens. So I started with actually, to start with, you probably experience that kids, the way they see the world is often very neutral. So they don't see maybe the differences we see, like how we prejudge people based on kind of their look and appearance and genders and age and everything. They just see humans. So my first superpower was kind of to create that button where we can look into the world with the eyes of a kid. So everything we made, an article or an ad or a product, we could just push that button and you could see it from the eyes of a kid. But then I thought maybe that's too simple. So I think that I should have a dashboard with a lot of buttons, so you could press those different buttons to actually, if you go into a meeting, if you read an article, if you see an ad, or etc., you can actually press that button and get in front of you how it would feel to be present in that meeting, to read that article from different perspectives. So that could be your different kind of ethnicity, it could be your gender, it could be your abilities, it could be your sexual orientation, or etc. So that's my kind of superpower dashboard created by me for you.
You might have to patent that. I think so, people listening to this might get onto their coders and their product teams straight away to build out this dashboard. I know Schibsted's got an army of product guys, so I'm sure you can have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
Brilliant. No, two brilliant answers. So no, that's all we've got time for in today's episode. Thanks, Azad, and thanks, Sumeet, for your time.
Likewise. Thank you. Bye-bye.